Oh yeah, I never got around to reacting to those things. Why don't we fix that? So if I remember correctly, I got completely wasted within 2 weeks of making those predictions. Thanks, Ferrari and Mercedes. Well, that was pretty embarrassing now, wasn't it? But alright, let's just decide to go at it again and have a little laugh and find out how wrong I could be. I think you know why we are here today, and that is to predict who will go where next year. Because 2026, that's going to be a big year for Formula 1, in which the entire concept of the car will change into something very different. And yet the car itself on the surface looks akin to something we would have seen out of the mid-2000s. And hey, I'm not dissing that. I am perfectly okay with that. It's a nice little bit of nostalgia for me. Now don't worry, I'm not going to be spending half of the video going over what I predicted last year. So for your amusement and your reference, here's what I predicted last year for each team, and you can find out which ones are right and which ones are wrong, including the Ferrari-Mercedes thing, and me thinking that Perez would have been with Hülkenberg. But hey, at least I got the Behrman-Ocon Haas prediction correct. That was something, and oh dear Mick, I'm so sorry things didn't work out for you. But anyway, we're going to be going at it again, and if you'd like to join in, feel free to share your predictions down in the comments, and if you like my predictions, maybe drop a like on this video, or if you're being really frisky, you can drop a subscribe to find out how wrong I am in real time when they actually announce driver announcements, okay? Well, let's go. And even though there are far fewer contracts up for renewal in 2026 or being torn up, there are still some notable transfers which I think could go down, as well as a couple of mid-season driver swaps from guess who? And we're going to be going in constructors order, so we're beginning with the likes of the champions, McLaren. Do I think they're going to be changing their lineup, Norris and Piastri? Well, no. Simply put, because they're contracted at least through until 2027 in the case of Lando, and Oscar is at the end of 2026. So I don't really see things changing, and McLaren doing their darndest to make sure that they keep up their ethos of team first. Constructors, defending that is their top priority, and the Drivers' Championship is, of course, a close second, but still second. And Norris has more experience under his belt in regards to fighting with Verstappen and having going for a title bid in 2024, whereas Piastri, he'll be hopeful to put all he has learnt into a proper concerted campaign and maybe break into the top 3 drivers at the very least. Not to mention be a fair lick more consistent than he was in 2024, because let's just say that even though he is my boy, he had a few instances this past season where he certainly made things a lot harder than it needed be, with qualifying snafus, track limits, and missing out on a couple of pole position opportunities, due to obviously the team slipping up as well as they were finding their feet. But in terms of the team dynamic, they seem to be getting the bigger picture. McLaren have done very well in establishing, nay, thrashing that into their drivers to make sure that there are no big driver bust-ups on the horizon, or at least they're not obvious. But it depends on how the championship campaign goes, because we've got to remember, on paper, this is looking likely to be the most open championship challenge this decade, if not this generation, since back in the early 2010s. So it could be open, or McLaren could build a car, the MCL 39, and it's between Norris and Piastri exclusively. If that's the case, then all bets are off, and McLaren will have a really major challenge to try and keep the status quo without risking losing all of their drivers. But right now, I can't predict anything else. Norris and Piastri, they're contracted, they seem to be getting on fine. There you go. They're sorted. Then we've got Leclerc and Hamilton, and I predict that they will be around next year because, again, they're contracted for 2026 at least. Leclerc, in theory, can go all the way to 2029 unless he takes out the option on his contract, supposedly, that lasts until the end of 2027, which is the same year that Hamilton is penned to be ending his contract and when, in theory, he could retire and moving on for Behrman. But we're not predicting 2027 or 2028. In the second season, I really don't see much difference because this will be a brand new year, and Lewis Hamilton, this year, 2025, is a little bit up in the air because, let's just say, these regulations have really not sat well with the 7-time world champion. This coming season might be a little bit better, it might be one of his best seasons in this current regulation cycle, but 2026 could be all to play for and really give him a concerted effort for a championship campaign that year especially. This year, 2025, maybe. But we're talking about the driver lineup, and on paper, it's still looking like to be the same, but it really depends in terms of how long it goes how these two work well together. Because in the space of just a week, we have seen how potent Lewis Hamilton's influence has been on Ferrari and how much money it can possibly generate from social media engagement alone. And when you combine that with Charles Leclerc, this is the most potent lineup we have on the grid that has not seen a single wheel turn in anger or even in testing outside of their own private campaigns. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be a solid cut play, with Lewis and Charles making a concerted effort to really get to know one another. Let's just hope that their fan bases behave and really don't give Fred Vasseur and his team a really big headache and really stir the pot to maybe end this relationship sooner than necessary. Now we're going over to Mercedes, and this is where things are getting a little bit more on the guessy side, because you might be thinking, well, surely Toto will want to keep George and Kimi, yeah? Well, that's not necessarily the case, because we all know about the Max Verstappen rumours going around, and George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, they're only contracted until the end of 2025. Now, of course, there is no way that Toto is going to be dropping Kimi after hyping him up for the last couple of years. He imagines him to be his future for the next several years, and we will probably see a contract extension depending on how well Kimi does. And it'll be one of those multi-year deal jobbies where we don't know the full extent of the length. It's to keep other teams from guessing and to stop them from breathing down Toto's neck. In the case of George, I feel like he will get an extension. It probably might be a 1+1 deal, so that means Toto could keep his options open in case Max does come knocking and things aren't looking too rosy over at Red Bull. But right now, I don't really see him changing the lineup, because this is the moment where Toto can now give George the opportunity to lead the team without question or quibble with Lewis's presence there. This is the acid test for Russell. And Antonelli, he's there for the long haul. But again, you just got to consider Verstappen. And I don't really want to be talking Max in the Mercedes section, but you can't deny this could be a factor for 2026. But I'm not going to be making that call here today. Whilst Toto does want one of the most exciting drivers on the grid to join him and his forces after letting him get away a decade ago, neither does he want to get rid of the talent that was established after letting Max get away all those years ago. Because something you really should be taking note of is that Mercedes now have two drivers that came from their junior series and team. That's something that really Wolff, Vowles and Mercedes should be proud of. So I don't really see that changing for the time being. Now, speaking of Verstappen and Red Bull, we are moving on to them. Right now, I am picturing that for 2026, it will be Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson. But given that this is Red Bull, I have to add an asterisk here, because this could easily change in the middle of the season. So I am not saying this is going to be a solid lineup for that entire season. They could easily swap somebody out, be it Max or Liam, with somebody else, given potential circumstances that may arise. I'll get into that in a moment, and who exactly might take up that role and get the call up, I will mention in the V-Carb Racing Bull section later on, so you gotta keep watching, as well as find out who I think will be the all-new lineup of Cadillac right at the end. It all depends on what happens next season, the season after next one. Max could sustain himself all the way through his contract, Liam might falter, he might fall out of favour, given the fact that I think Red Bull is calling Liam and his team's bluff by saying if they didn't use him, that they would lose him to another team. And after all the money that that team spent on him, Red Bull, they are not wanting anybody else to get the benefits from that. Much like how Alpine lost that with Piastri going to McLaren, they reaped the rewards because, well, they wanted Oscar and didn't quibble about his contract. But the fact is, though, is that it really wouldn't surprise me that 2025, we might actually see a relatively stable period where there are no mid-season driver swaps. I hope. My previous video said that there could be one, and my cynical side is there, but I wanted to keep that cynicism out of this video. Ideally, I think Lawson and Verstappen will go into the 2026 season as they are, and then depending on what happens, say maybe Liam doesn't quite cut the mustard, he doesn't turn out to be the leader that Red Bull hoped for as the replacement of Verstappen in the near future, or maybe Verstappen looks at the rules, he tries them out and is like, I don't like this car, neither do I like the bureaucracy of the FIA, I'm going to leave and take the rest of the year off and come back in 2027, weigh up my options, or maybe I might decide to go and retire, maybe do something else that isn't governed by the FIA. And I reckon that Christian Horner will have learnt from his error in giving Checo that morale booster of a contract which really blew up in his face, and maybe simply cut loose or not wait as long. Waiting it out didn't work from Red Bull's point of view, even though it was mainly down to the technical team failing to heed their drivers' concerns sooner. both Max and Checo. So yeah, I am pinning Liam and Max at Red Bull at the moment, but there is a caveat to it. There might be a driver swap sometime in the summer break. It's not set in stone. Now we get to Aston Martin. I bet you're going to be thinking that I'm going to be playing it wholly safe and that it's going to be Alonso Stroll. Well, even though Honda has said publicly that they wouldn't get involved with the driver lineup for 2026 when they arrive as the works partner of Aston Martin, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that maybe Yuki Tsunoda will get the plum next to Fernando. Oh, look, come on. You're going against what you said about Stroll's contract being as long as a piece of string or something. Well, yeah, that is very true. String can be infinitely long. But equally, if you have the right pair of scissors or the right pressure, or if you pull at it hard enough, or if it's not as strong, it can easily break before you expect it. So don't be surprised if there is the right amount of pressure from the right person or peoples or companies or sponsors or shareholders or investors behind the scenes that maybe Lance's time in Formula One simply is just no longer possible. Because you've got to remember that Stroll is now going into, in 2026, being one of the most experienced drivers on the grid. In the top third of all of the drivers, all 22. He will be, I think, the 7th or 8th most experienced, and that is wild. Yes, he's not the worst driver we've ever seen in Formula One, but is he the kind of guy that warrants being around the sport for nearly a decade? No, he's not. And like I alluded, even though Honda has been a little less vocal in regard to their tradition of insisting that if they power a team that one of their drivers takes up a slot, I wouldn't be surprised that maybe as they get closer to the date, they might start to exert their influence if it becomes clear that we're going to be getting another season where Stroll scores a small fraction of what Fernando does. And yes, of course, you might be saying, well, surely they'd want to keep the status quo because in 2026 they'll have the best facilities, as Alonso has said. Well, it's all very well good having the best facilities, but that sometimes does not count for toffee in history, because history has proven that even though some entities, companies, peoples have the best of something, it doesn't necessarily always win out. Just the right amount of execution on something that maybe not quite the best could win out in terms of public opinion and prosperity. And it's quite ironic too that Team Silverstone has invested all of these facilities, and yet when they were their smaller, svelter selves, they were ultimate giant killers. And if Honda, Aramco, and all of the other sponsors that Papa Stroll's team has managed to manifest start to look at Stroll in 2025 and think, well, you and Honda want to win the Constructors and maybe go for a world championship, Lance isn't that guy, then they're going to have to do something. And Yuki Tsunoda is right there, proving to be a draw with fans, and let's just say Aston Martin could do with some genuine fans who would support them, instead of having Lance Stroll there, who's basically the derision of the majority of the F1 fandom and public. That would be certainly an absolute boon, and Honda would be more than happy to get his services on the grid, because it looked like Honda was begging Red Bull to give Yuki a chance in the RB20, and it's now clear that he's not going to be around next year. They want to make sure he stays on the grid because he has got good potential. So Aston Martin is the best port of call. And it really depends on Lance. This is the most important season ever. If he shows the same lack of enthusiasm or commitment as he did in 2024, then what hope will Aston Martin have in 2025? Because already Adrian Newey is getting a little bit gloomy, saying that he might not be able to provide the goods if 2026 proves to be an engine-driven formula, and he's already behind the curve in terms of understanding the brand new rules because they constantly keep being updated, and Red Bull did a really effective job of isolating him from any talk regarding aero, so he had no access to any of his tools whatsoever. Yeah, Aston Martin may not have gotten as much as they would have liked from their big investment in Newey. So yeah, if Stroll wants to prove me wrong with this decision, then he has to really drive like a proper driver and understand that in Brazil, there was an escape route. Anyway, Alpine, Gasly and Colapinto. Need I really say much more? I mean, I will because, well, I want to talk about it, but it is quite inevitable, wouldn't you say? I feel bad for Jack Doohan, I really do, but even if he did see out 2025 in its entirety, his contract at best was only a one-year job, and that came with a supposed review after Miami and the flyaway races were done and they went to Europe, Alpine. And it's just really, really sad considering that Flavio is his manager. And he's the only Alpine Academy driver to have actually raced for Alpine in a Grand Prix. How insane and ineffective is that? Then there's all the stuff with High-Tech, Toyota, the Academy there. That's a complete dead horse of vestigial tale, but that's beside the point. And right now, what they are doing with Franco Colapinto on social media is akin to that of a brand new driver, and he's only the reserve. Reserves don't get nearly as much attention. Not even Liam Lawson got this amount of attention. And considering that Alpine paid $15 million supposedly for Colapinto's services, they paid that to Williams, they want to make a good return on their investment as soon as possible. So a full-time position in 2026 is inevitable, and maybe a 2025 call-up could be the case. Not to mention, he's on a supposed 5-year deal. 5 years this day and age is practically unheard of. This 5-year deal is akin to what Flavio gave Michael Schumacher from 91 through 95 when he plucked Michael from Eddie Jordan. He believes in Franco that much. And as for Pierre, well, I realistically don't think he's got anywhere else that he could go. But then again, if Alpine continue their progress at the end of 2024, need he look anywhere else? Because Alpine is looking fairly solid again, after a really dire beginning to last year's campaign. They've now got their act together, they are turning things around. And even though Alpine and Renault admitting that if they want to get anywhere, they have to give up making their own power units was a shame on a historical and sensical level and fanatical level, logically, it was the best decision because they simply underinvested and they were being completely overpowered and over-conquered by everyone else. And not to mention, right now, Pierre is the absolute leader without question. Him being able to take that position from Ocon, who clearly had become disowned and disenfranchised for the entire Alpine operation, it was inevitable that Gasly would remain for the next couple of years, and Flavio seems to be quite happy with Pierre and what he's doing right now in terms of geeing up the troops. He did a really good job at AlphaTauri, he's doing a really good job here, and now Franco's here with some extra attention, positive attention mind you, something that Alpine could really do with. I really wouldn't be surprised if the Gasly-Colapinto combination endures for not just 2026, but also beyond, because again, unless there is a major change which sees some of the front runners retire from the sport or move to lower teams, I really don't see Pierre going to Ferrari or Mercedes or Red Bull. Back to Red Bull, certainly not. So I think maybe he might be sitting pretty here. And even though I'm really sad that Mick Schumacher didn't get the opportunity here, at least he's doing well in endurance, that's something. Oh yes, Alpine, I predict they will become High-Tech next year, so it'll be High-Tech GP Mercedes or something. So that's a little bonus prediction for you. And in terms of Haas, I'm continuing the prediction from 2025 that I got spot on, with Ocon and Behrman going on for another season. Simply because, well, they'll gel really well in my honest opinion. I really don't see this lineup changing. And even though many people online and in the comments have been saying that they wish for Ocon to fail, that he will drag Haas down, that he will be a negative force against Ayao Komatsu, the team principal, I see it to be the complete opposite. This could be the season 2025 where we see Ocon thrive. We see the best of him at a team that wants him and values him. And as we have seen from many people when they move to different teams, including the former head of engineering at Red Bull, Rob Marshall, who went to McLaren, if you're valued and wanted enough, that can do you a world of good and be ultimately quite refreshing. Ocon right away will get a major boost being part of a team that is on the ground floor of a major investment campaign from Toyota, which may or may not see them become a works operation with the Japanese automaker, which will see them excel even more to levels which would have been impossible under Gunther Steiner. This refresh came at the right time for Ocon, and he's positively beaming right now. Sure, Alpine's turning things around as well, but I think Haas, their future seems a little bit more concrete and solid. And Behrman, he equally is wanted and valued by Komatsu. These two drivers are not drivers that Io is just going, well, that'll do, that's the best we can hope for. No, he has proven time and time again, the team principal, that he believes in these drivers, and that will do Behrman and Ocon a huge service. They will do really well. This could be a really good concerted effort to maybe beat Aston Martin, and I kind of want it. So I don't see this lineup changing for quite a while until maybe Behrman gets the call up to Ferrari if one of the Scuderia drivers leaves or retires. Now, okay, we're going to be talking about racing bulls now. And this one I think is a fairly sensible and logical one. Again, as long as there's not a mid-season swap or something like that. Or maybe somebody being dragged up from Formula 2 as well as Arvid Lindblad potentially. So, speaking of, I believe it will be Arvid Lindblad and Isaac Hadjar for a second season. maybe his last one depending on how things go. And even though I suggested in my previous video that Arvid could be a driver for Racing Bulls in 2025, replacing Isaac potentially, I don't wish to make that call here. I don't have quite enough confidence to do it in this proper formal video. As a result, I would like to refer back to my ideal scenario that could really see the Red Bull Junior team program really get back on its legs and be its most effective, well, as long as it can be if they choose not to put Tsunoda in the senior team. Hadjar will be then tested against Lindblad to see whether or not he can sustain a third season or not, and Arvid, this will be his first campaign. And given the amount of commitment that Marco and Horner are handing his way, and if Arvid proves to be doing that for Racing Bulls and their efforts for 5th place in the Constructors, then maybe there could be a situation where Lawson is demoted back to Racing Bulls, and then Arvid gets the call-up, because with Lawson being called up to the senior team after only 11 races, not even half a Grand Prix season, well, all bets are off in that regard. Anybody at any time could be given an opportunity to give it a go. Or Lawson might get off the hook if Max Verstappen chooses to leave, and then Arvid is then put in parachuted as his teammate. Either way, I feel like something will happen between these two teams in 2026, after maybe taking a break in 2025. So maybe we might not get a straight-up hat-trick, but 3 mid-season swaps in 4 years is still a pretty interesting and sad record to have. Then Williams, by contrast, I really don't see any change for a good few years if James Vowles gets his way. It's going to be Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon for 2026. And even though both men are contracted only until the end of next season, 2026, if all goes well and Williams prove to be right in their progression and they get the new regulations just so that means they're back fighting for regular points positions and maybe a cheeky podium, then I wouldn't see Carlos or Alex deciding to leave for another team. I could see them believing in the program more and more and remaining that constant, steady union of drivers that this team really needs. Stability from 2 solid drivers who have proven their worth, one of them winning multiple Grand Prix for Ferrari, bringing that expertise to Grove. Even though Williams and Ferrari are historic rivals, this is a huge boost for that team, and Vowles will be keen to maintain this duet. For 2026 though, it's going to be a dead cert. I really don't see Carlos or Alex jumping anytime soon, because Carlos and James, there are so many photos now of them laughing together and embracing. These two are rock solid. And with Alex, we still got to remember that James is quite committed to him still, because you remember all the Mercedes hubbub as to who could replace Hamilton? Alex was considered, but James is also equally keen to remind people that, hey, Alex is still our guy for another year. Let's remember that, okay? We still got him. He's ours. And then really, I don't see any change over at Sauber when it becomes Audi. Nico Hülkenberg, Gabriel Bortoleto. I don't see Binotto or Jonathan Wheatley wanting to rock things and change things up on a whim, because they already know that this is going to be a long haul when it comes to re-energizing this team and get them to be competitive amongst the front runners. Binotto saying that maybe it could be by the end of the decade we're in that position. So Audi might be wanting to take their time and therefore give their drivers the room to breathe, especially the rookie Bortoleto. Hülkenberg, he's sitting pretty. He'll be driving for a German team. He's the German guy, hoping to maybe reinvigorate German support in Formula One, which has admittedly been on the wane in the last few years. So that's right there. So I don't see the lineup changing. I see the car maybe slightly improving, and that's pretty much it, really. Hülkenberg is a decent force in helping the turnaround of Haas. Maybe he can work the same magic over at Sauber, the team which absolutely adored him when he was last there in 2013. Having that appearance there might motivate the team even more, now having a good team principal. And Binotto, behind the scenes, Audi, power unit, I think he could be fairly good. But right now, I don't see the lineup changing. It'll be going for a second season. And now, it's time. The moment you've been waiting for. Cadillac. Am I going to be making some interesting calls here? Well, here we go. Now, for those of you who might have been watching one of Tomo's videos where I added my contributions as to who could partner up at Cadillac together, I am maintaining my opinions from that video, which means that I believe that it will be Colton Herta mixed up with Sergio Perez, him coming back after a year's sabbatical. What, you're kidding, right, Law? Why would you put Checo back in there? He's absolutely washed. But hey, I stand by this decision and I'll tell you why. Even though the Andretti's role in the team has diminished drastically since the original entry was made back in 2023, Mario is still there on the board of directors, and I wouldn't be surprised that some of the family's influence still remains in the background. Just in the shadows, nothing that will take the interest or curiosity of Formula One management and make them angry. So realistically, given the connection of Andretti and Colton Herta, this might be his best opportunity of getting into Formula One. Or maybe the last opportunity, because Colton's come on record saying he's getting sick and tired of the speculation about Formula One. It's distracting from his IndyCar campaigns. So he would rather this speculation come good, or people stop talking about it, he draws a line, and then he can focus on IndyCar for the rest of his career, or maybe something else. So I do think that maybe Andretti will realise this and give him this proper chance. An American driver at the American team, it'll be extra viewing figures. The American push, Formula One, it's extra gravy. As for the other driver, well, this could be the opportunity for Checo's return. Granted, this is a bit of a shot in the dark, but not one without some logic behind it, because Cadillac will be a new team in Formula One, with many existing fans doubting them or dismissing them because they're American and only know how to turn left, ha ha. Well, no. The team will want to show, much like how Andretti did when they were setting up their team, that they get Formula One. They understand the sport. They're not going into this half-baked. Because we've got to remember, the Andretti headquarters, which is now being taken up by General Motors and Cadillac, is based in Silverstone, where all the best minds of Formula One are located. So if they want to get personnel, or people want to move to them, they don't have to up sticks and relocate. I've got full confidence, and therefore, people might fully understand the potential of Sergio Perez when he's actually listened to, and he has a car that actually is developed with his ideals in mind. They will want Checo as their showcase hire. Yes, he's seen better days, and the sponsorship that comes with him will of course come into any discussion surrounding his name, but much like with Ocon at Haas, if Cadillac make a concerted effort to make Checo feel wanted and valued, that could help restore the Mexican Ministers of Defense's reputation and confidence in his own ability. And that, I think, took a bashing after what happened in Monaco 2022, which changed the dynamic between he and Verstappen forever. Because ever since then, you felt like Max always had something stuck in his craw regarding Perez. Things weren't quite the same after that. And as we saw in 2023, when Checo tried to make a good effort for the championship, Max completely wasted him in Miami, and after that, it was all over for Sergio. And then couple that with all the stuff that was being said about Checo's feedback not being taken seriously because Max was doing so well, so he was being ignored, and then Marco went on the warpath after every single race, and then single-handedly turned the world against Checo. That was absolutely balmy, absolutely insane and unfair, and that really didn't let up for 2024, but Checo had a little bit more of a mindset to be able to counter that, even though it didn't really translate into not crashing the car. But again, the car went away from him in terms of development, and now Max was suffering from that as well because Red Bull's technical team believed they were right. And I think that really dented Checo's reputation. So he will be very keen for any team that takes him on for maybe 1 or 2 more years to end his story on his terms, to really take on his feedback seriously and respect him for what he can do. Because at Racing Point, at Force India, he worked his magic really well, getting podiums for a team that nobody expected could come good. Maybe we might get the same thing at Cadillac, some cheeky points finishes, way beyond punching their weight and stuff. Not to mention for the fact that Checo's money would be very important, and his popularity in the Western Hemisphere is something to note of as well, because that's what Cadillac wants, America to get behind him. And having Checo and Colton being a recognizable name in IndyCar and American motorsport, yeah, that's an absolute win. That's really going to help them in their first couple of seasons when they're finding their feet, and maybe they might get some of the European fans on side as well, who knows? But anyway, those are my picks for 2026. Again, let me know down in the comments what your predictions are, like the video if you like my predictions, and maybe put in a cheeky subscribe if you want to find out how wrong I am as soon as possible. And if you want to stick around, I think that this video might be to your liking, so I better get ready. I'll see you over in that video, so I'll be right back, okay?